that a human being has ever seen from the surface of another planet.
On August 20th, 1975, the first Viking spaceship was launched.
You are seeing something that no other human has ever seen before.
Former seas and mountains.
Huge canyons.
That sense of wonderment and achievement and always working towards your goal.
We can do, and we will do.
And liftoff.
Touchdown confirmed.
Mars is unavoidably special.
We've landed and we've scooped.
We've roved, we've orbited.
Together, we did it, but the attitude was together we can do it.
The future is what you make out of it. You can make it real.
And here we are with Mars Perseverance, 51 years later, getting ready to do the first ever Mars return mission.
Eventually, we can bring those samples back to Earth and determine for the very first time, did life exist on Mars?
Hello, and welcome to Kennedy Space Center. My name is Bettina and Claude. Thank you for joining us for this pre-launch press conference. Moments ago, the Launch Readiness Review concluded for the Mars 2020 mission, which will carry the Mars Perseverance rover and the Ingenuity helicopter to the Red Planet. We're very excited about this new era in Mars exploration. You can catch the launch here on NASA television with broadcast starting at 7 a.m. and the launch will start at 7:50 a.m. To learn more about this mission to Mars, we are joined by a great panel to tell us about Mars 2020 and future plans to Mars. First, we have NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, Thomas Zurbuchen, Associate Administrator for NASA Science Mission Directorate, Matt Wallace, Deputy Program Manager for the Jet Propulsion Lab, Omar Bays, Launch Director for the NASA Launch Service Program, Tor Bruno, President and CEO of United Launch Alliance, and Jessica Williams, 45th Space Wing Weather Officer. As a reminder, we'll start taking questions from our media who is joining us virtually on the phone bridge. We'll also take questions from social media using the hashtag Countdown to Mars. So let's start with NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine.
Well, thank you so much, Bettina. And I just want to say the Launch Readiness Review is complete, and we are indeed go for launch. I want to thank our ULA teammates and, of course, our JPL teammates as well. This has been an amazing team effort. And I remember when I first came to the agency, Thomas Zurbuchen came to me and said, hey, look, we have a risk here. The risk is Mars 2020. I said, well, what's the risk? He said, well, we might not go in 2020. And here we are, just a number of years later, but we are, in fact, going to launch what we now call Mars Perseverance in the year 2020. And I think the name is perfectly appropriate. A young man in Virginia named Alex Mather, a seventh grader, is the person who named it. And so we are in extraordinary times right now with the coronavirus pandemic, and yet we have, in fact, persevered. And we have protected this mission because it is so important. We declared this mission to be essential. And there's a number of reasons why. And I'll just give you a few of them, some of the reasons that excite me the most. First of all, the President gave us an objective to go to Mars with humans, to plant an American flag on Mars. Well, in order to do that, we have to be able to sustain human life on Mars. So there's a mission on Perseverance called MOXIE. It's a technology demonstrator. How do we use the carbon dioxide atmosphere of Mars and create pure oxygen that we can use for life support? So that's a really exciting mission that is a precursor to an eventual human mission to Mars. But there's so much more. When we think about the Mars Perseverance rover, for the first time ever, we're going to fly a helicopter on another planet. We call it Ingenuity. And of course, Ingenuity is going to be a tech demonstrator for this particular mission, but in the future it could transform how we do planetary science on these other worlds, and eventually be a scout so that we can figure out where exactly do we need to send our our robots. But I think the other thing that's very important about this mission, this is the first time in history when NASA has dedicated a mission to what we call astrobiology, the search for life, either maybe now, or ancient life on another world. And of course, when we go to the Jezero crater, which is obviously a big crater on Mars, but it's also a former lake bed, and it had a river that flowed into it, and that river delta is a place where we believe there could be, I'm not saying there is, we don't know, but there could have been at one point in time life. We know that Mars had a very active atmosphere and a very active hydrosphere, that it was protected from the radiation of deep space at one time 3 billion years ago. In other words, Mars was at one time habitable. We know that because of past missions, Spirit and Opportunity. And now that we know what the history of Mars was, we can say, okay, maybe there was life there. Let's go find out if there was life on Mars. And in fact, the other exciting thing is we're going to cache samples. We're going to cache samples on the surface of another world for a future mission in 2026 to bring those samples back to Earth. And that will be the first time in history that we've done a Mars return mission. In fact, it's the first time in history we've done a return mission from any planet. So these are very, very exciting times. Very important mission for the United States of America, and of course a very, very important mission for the world. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Associate Administrator of the Science Mission Directorate at NASA, who has done just amazing work helping us get to where we are today, and somebody who understands how uniting this mission actually is. So Dr. Thomas Zurbuchen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Administrator, and thanks to you for your commitment to success, without which we wouldn't be here today. So I really, really appreciate that. And I just couldn't be more happy to be here today and have this amazing mission on top of a rocket ready to go. And actually from this launch readiness review know that all the issues are addressed, and we are in fact ready now. We're just counting down and just really celebrating with the team. You already mentioned, Administrator, why we want to go to Mars, and I'm not going to repeat it. For me, the most exciting part is to really go land in this river delta that we think has so many promising landscapes, kind of rocks, that in fact we want to not only see images of and measurements of, we want to see back in the best labs that are available to humanity, which is of course on Earth, with Mars sample return being a reality. We're excited to go learn about the climate of Mars, the weather there, with unprecedented weather information that is right there also, and teaches us about that. And needless to say, we're going to make amazing, surprising discoveries, kind of in a way that it always happens. The most important thing that happens in these missions are the things we did not plan. Those are discoveries that are rewriting school books all over the world. Well, there are two things that really are important to me today I want to focus on. The first one is Perseverance. You already mentioned how appropriate this name is. Perseverance, many people think initially is about something hard. It is something beautiful. It's together with exploration, together with hope, together with vision. It is what actually allows us to achieve these amazing goals. And this mission is full of perseverance. It's perseverance early on even of bringing this amazing idea to bear and designing this exciting rover together with international partners that persevered themselves developing these instruments and sending them over. It is going through the adversity that we always encounter when it comes to complex, exploration, but also in this case over and above because of the tremendous difficulties in the sample return technology that was invented at JPL and their collaborators. But then you talked about it, life changed. And on this rover we have the Unity plaque recognizing the first responders that also had an important role and actually kept everybody safe, not only the good people who worked at this rover and the launch vehicle, but also their friends and family all over the United States and in fact all over the world. In addition to that, on this rover is a plaque with 11 million names, and I want to tell you my name is there, as are my entire family And both of my parents, who are no longer with us, they too are part of that important exploration. And I hope so many of the people who are watching right now, because we're going together as a world. And I want to give you a glimpse of going together as a world from a little country over there in Europe. And I want to show the first image. This is in the background there, the Matterhorn. You've seen it from chocolate bars, perhaps. You know it's one of the most amazing mountains, almost 15,000 feet high. And what you see in the forefront is a light show, actually, really onto the Matterhorn with Mars images. You see, of course, looking at these rocks as, well, this could be on another planet too. Well, this is in Switzerland. It's actually at 9,000 feet high. That's where the crew is right now. But here's what's exciting right now. Every night until the 15th of August, and next image, please, the crew is going to project images such as this one onto the Matterhorn, images of coming together as a world and persevering and exploring our neighboring planet together, but being explorers together and persevering. And so for me, that image is just really one of those demonstrations. No, this is not fake. That's exactly what happened last night. That's exactly what happened next night in Switzerland and for the next few nights. So I just really want to thank Jerry Hofstetter, the artist and event designer who did that, and of course Daniel Lucken, who is the official in charge who enabled that. There's a lot of people who had to agree to that moment of coming together. Ich kann nur sagen, wie froh dass ich bin, dass das dort ist. Und danke vielmals, Herr Matt, für alles zusammen. Yes, that was Swiss German, and I do speak that language. With that, however, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and I just want to tell you how much I appreciate Matt and his work and the work of his entire team. Matt and I got to know each other a lot because we too had to persevere together. Matt?
Thank you, Thomas. I'm not going to speak German, but I'm pretty excited. This is the 5th Mars Rover mission I've had an opportunity to work on, and I have to say this one's really special for a lot of reasons, some of which you've already heard about. That we're doing transformative science. Really, for the first time, we're looking for signs of life on another planet. And as Thomas mentioned, for the first time, we're going to collect samples that'll be part of, we hope, the first sample return from another planet. And there's a lot of other firsts along the way. Administrator mentioned our first powered aerial capability with the Ingenuity helicopter. We're making oxygen on the surface of Mars for the first time. For the first time, we have an opportunity to use autonomous systems to avoid hazards on as we land in Jezero Crater, and that's a technology that'll feed forward into future robotic systems and human exploration systems, and that's exciting. We're also carrying microphones for the first time. We're going to hear the sounds of the spacecraft landing on another planet and the rover drilling in the rocks and rolling over the surface of Mars, and that's pretty exciting. And I'll mention one more, which is kind of near and dear to my heart. For the first time, we're going to have an opportunity to see our spacecraft land on another planet. We've got commercial ruggedized cameras that we've distributed essentially all over the spacecraft, and they'll get high-definition video that we'll bring back after we land on the surface of the entire landing activity, from the inflation of the parachute to the touchdown of the rover, and that's going to be some very exciting footage. So the whole mission is very exciting for me. If we bring up the first graphic, just from a quick historical perspective, we really began to look for ways to leverage the powerful sky crane delivery system that we developed to successfully land Curiosity in Gale Crater in 2012. We started to look for that opportunity almost immediately after we launched Curiosity in 2011. We got a new start on the project in 2012. We had our instruments selected by mid-2014, and then we got down to work accommodating those instruments and experiments, and started building the vehicle. Along the way, we had plenty of challenges. We had to qualify a new planetary parachute. It's another first time we've done that as an agency in 40 or 50 years. It's not an easy thing to do. It requires a lot of number of suborbital rocket flights out of Wallops. We managed to get that done, and we got through a number of other challenges in our development as well. Kind of late in the game, we were asked to accommodate this little thing called the Mars helicopter. And as you can see, it was well after most of the payloads were assigned to the project, and so, you know, we had to do a little bit of a magic trick to get that one on the rover. Pulled a bit of a rabbit out of the hat, but I guess it was fate because we managed to get it done, and the helicopter team delivered their system, and it's sitting up with the Perseverance rover on top of our Atlas V rocket, getting ready to go to Mars with us. So you all know the launch is coming up, and of course there's about a 6.5-month cruise to Mars, and we'll land the middle of February of 2021 at Jezero Crater. So if you go to the next graphic, please. Okay, this is the important part. This is where I talk about the team. This is just a small fraction of the team, believe it or not. This is just the JPL team, and it's just a fraction of the more than 2,000 people over the course of the mission development that worked on the project at JPL. And of course, our team didn't stop at JPL. Pretty much every NASA center participated in this project in one form or another. It was really a cross-agency effort, and something we're extremely appreciative of all the support that we got. And it didn't stop there. Thomas mentioned we have 3 instruments from Europe, one from France, one from Spain, one from Norway, and of course we have a very large science team. I think it's more than 250 scientists really from around the world which are participating in this project as well. If you bring up the next graphic, I think we got a picture here of the spacecraft. I like it because it gives you a sense of the complexity of this system. You see the cruise stage up on top. The rover is a little hard to see, but you can see one of the wheels there, and the helicopter is actually mounted underneath the body of the rover, and they're both nestled up into the upper portion of the entry capsule, and we're about to bring the heat shield up to encapsulate the entire spacecraft. This is right before going into our integrated flow with the launch vehicle just a few weeks ago. You know, you can't build something this complex without a lot of help from our industry partners, and they stepped up big time. We built flight hardware in 44 out of the 50 states in the country, more than 550 different cities and towns and communities. So no matter where you are in this country, you don't have to go very far probably to find somebody that's been part of this mission, and it's a tremendous team effort. You know, it's we work with cutting edge technology, and when we do that, we expect to be challenged. And as Thomas and the administrator have mentioned, our fundamental job is to explore new places we haven't been, answer questions we don't know the answers to, sometimes create questions that we didn't even know we needed to ask. And so you expect new issues and new problems, I have to say, along the way. But really nothing prepared us for what we had to deal with in the middle of March as the pandemic struck, and not just our team, but obviously communities across the country and the world. We really, at that point of the mission, we were in our final assembly activities. It's critically important that the team do that assembly correctly, that they do it without making mistakes or damaging the hardware. There's really no safety net at that point. We're working with a very limited schedule. Every day, every shift, every hour is something we're scrutinized to make sure we're going to stay on track, because we got a 20-day planetary launch window, and if we miss it, we're going to push out by a couple years. And so, you know, just having the coronavirus issue at that point in time was very challenging for us. And of course, no matter how many hardships we were facing, there's a community set of community out there, first responders, nurses, doctors, and medical community that were really facing life and death situations at the same time. And so I asked the team a couple months ago to do something to kind of represent this particular challenge that we all faced here in 2020 on this mission. And I think if you bring up the next graphic, you can see a technician on our assembly team installing a plate. This is on the, a little hard to tell, but it's on the aft port side, left side of the Rover. And we call the plate the Perseverance COVID-19 plate. And there's a good shot of it. You can see we have a representation of the Earth on the top, kind of to symbolize the challenge that we faced, globally as the pandemic struck. We have a representation of the spacecraft leaving the Earth and heading to Mars. And of course, all of this is appropriately supported by the rod and serpent of the medical community. During this period, this is a group of people that really inspired, I think, our team to keep going, and we hope that in some small way this mission can help inspire the people that have had to go through this pandemic as well. So if we go to the next graphic, please. I mentioned the team. You saw some pictures. Our team actually doesn't end with international contributions and industry partners and other NASA centers. We include all of you as well. And this plate, if you look at the top left corner of this plate, you'll see 3 small microfiche chips, which Thomas referred to. These are the places where his family's names and 11 million other names are etched onto those microfiche chips. We had only intended to fly one, but we got so much interest we couldn't fit it on one, so we flew 3. And you see on the plate as well representation of the solar system with Earth and Mars, and there is some hidden Morse code, I think, in the rays of the sun, which people quickly recognized spelled out "explore as one," which is what we intend to do. We're going to launch the vehicle here in just a couple days, and we're looking forward to having everybody come along for the ride. If you go to nasa.gov, be my guest, you'll find plenty of experiences there to see the launch and to see some of the behind the scenes interviews. Also at mars.nasa.gov/Mars 2020. There's if you click on the participate, there's opportunities to get to some pretty cool social media filters. There's a photo booth there where you can take a picture with the Mars Perseverance rover, as some competitions and some other things. So we invite all of you to ride shotgun along with us starting on Thursday. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our launch director, Omar Baez.
Thank you, Matt. And as everybody else here has mentioned, our situation did change. I would have never thought that a launch director would be working from home. And I've done that for the last 5 months. And we used to have something called every other year here called Take Your Kids to Work. Well, guess what? Every day was Take Your Kids to Work Day. And I bet you it's been an experience for the kids, but it's humbling as a parent to see how our whole team, from the range to our partners at JPL to our partners ULA to our folks at headquarters, how we all had to adjust to work in this environment and to collaborate electronically, where before it was a face-to-face interaction versus seeing somebody's little picture on a computer screen and voice. And even as simple as a launch readiness review, which we had this morning, where it would have been shoulder to shoulder. That room would have been full and people standing up in the back. Sparse settings, everybody wearing a mask. You had trouble hearing some people because you're wearing these masks. So there's a challenge and a penalty that goes with doing these things. And I've seen the team react and overcome all of that. And it makes me very proud. And here we are. A couple of days from launch. We did complete the launch readiness review. If I could have the folks roll a short video here, I'll show you how we're going to get Perseverance to the red planet. And it starts with that right there. That's the Atlas V with its RD-180 motors being stacked into the MLP at the VIF at Complex 41. That's the SRMs going up. We're flying 4 of them on this mission, and that gives the Atlas that extra oomph it needs to leave the Earth's gravity well with Perseverance and Ingenuity. And there you see about the last time we got to see the rover and helicopter stack before it got encapsulated. And we took that out to Complex 41 on the 7th and stacked it on top of the vehicle, got it ready. Environmentally, for planetary protection purposes, we had to prepare that area to be able to ingress and egress, and on the 24th of this month we inserted the RTG, which is going to power the rover on Mars for the next couple of years. And we finished out all our testing, and all that remains is I have 3 goes to go. Tomorrow at 8 in the morning, I give the go for the vehicle to roll out. We take a day of rest after tomorrow to get synced up with having to come in at 2 or 3 in the morning. I give a go to fuel the vehicle. And once we're ready and the spacecraft's configured, 1 more go. And 4 minutes later, we're going to be flying to Mars. And that makes my job really simple. And over to Tori to explain the rest of it.
All right. Thank you, Omar. I cannot tell you how thrilled we are to lift Perseverance. ULA and its Heritage rockets have taken every U.S. mission to Mars, but this one is arguably the most sophisticated and in some ways the most exciting of all of them. So it will sit atop our mighty Atlas in the 541 configuration. I like to call that one the Dominator because that is our second most powerful Atlas. So supplementing that core with its 860,000 pounds of thrust from the RD-180 will be 4 massive solid rocket motors that you saw in Omar's video, each of them generating another 280,000 pounds of thrust. This rocket is going to leap off the pad with this relatively tiny payload, so do not blink when they say ignition. Now I've got a mission profile video to show you that'll just kind of walk through what that flight will look like. If you could run that, please.
3, 2, 1. Main engine start, 0, and liftoff of the Atlas V.
The Atlas V RD-180 main engine and 4 solid rocket boosters ignite to generate more than 10.2 million newtons, or 2.3 million pounds of thrust, to lift the rocket on its way towards a hyperbolic escape trajectory. Shortly after liftoff, Atlas begins a pitch over to attain the proper flight path while minimizing the dynamic pressure the vehicle experiences during flight. The Atlas V reaches Mach 1, the speed of sound, at 35 seconds. Following burnout, the 4 SRBs are jettisoned at 1 minute 49 seconds. In the next 2.5 minutes of first stage flight, the Atlas V will more than triple its velocity. At 3 minutes 27 seconds, the payload fairing is jettisoned. At 4 minutes 22 seconds, propellant levels deplete and the booster engine shuts down. The Atlas V is now traveling at more than 21,680 kilometers, or 13,470 miles per hour, and located nearly 156 kilometers, or 97 miles in altitude, and 497 kilometers, or 309 miles downrange. 6 seconds later, the Atlas Centaur separation system activates to release the booster stage. The vehicle now weighs a little more than 5% of what it did at liftoff. 10 seconds later, the first burn of the Centaur main engine begins. Burning liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, the Centaur is attaining orbital velocity. At approximately 11.5 minutes into flight, cutoff of the Centaur main engine, or MECO 1, occurs. The mission now enters a 30-minute coast phase in preparation for the Earth escape burn. The Centaur main engine is restarted at 45 minutes. This burn provides the required thrust for Centaur to escape Earth orbit. Approximately 8 minutes later, final cutoff of the Centaur main engine occurs. This completes powered flight. Centaur will coast for nearly 5 minutes in preparation for spacecraft separation. At about 57.5 minutes, Centaur releases the spacecraft into a hyperbolic orbit, traveling at more than 41,000 kilometers, or nearly 26,000 miles per hour, on a 7-month cruise to Mars, where it will seek signs of ancient life on the red planet and collect rock and soil samples for possible return to Earth.
So the vehicle is sitting atop its launch platform in our vertical assembly or vertical integration facility right now. Processing has been going very smoothly for the last several days. So Atlas is go, Centaur is go, and we are literally chomping at the bit to take this nuclear-powered dune buggy out to Mars.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to go to Jessica Williams of the 45th Space Wing, weather officer.
Well, overall, the weather looks very favorable for launch Thursday morning. Today, we had a surface ridge of high pressure built into South Florida, and what this did for us is shift the weather pattern from last week so that we have southwest winds in the low levels in the mornings. That's offshore winds. And this pattern will persist through this weekend, so through the 48-hour backup window. So this gives us dry mornings with those offshore winds, but it does give us chances for showers and thunderstorms in the afternoon and evening. So if we look at our launch day forecast, the chart for the launch day forecast, we should have a 20% probability of violation for the cumulus cloud rule and the thick cloud layer rule. And this is really just due to a weak boundary being off the coast of the southeast. So we're expecting to see isolated to a few scattered showers just offshore from Complex 41, but they will be moving very little or moving away from the pad. We have that slight chance of violating for the cumulus cloud rule, and there's also expected to be some mid-level clouds scattered to broken associated with this weak boundary off the coast. So we could see just a brief period of violating the thick cloud layer rule, but again, overall, it's only at a 20% violation for the overall 2-hour window. So if we look at our 24-hour backup chart, again, we have offshore winds from the southwest in the morning, 8 to 10 knots. We have a 10% probability of violating for the cumulus cloud rule as that weak boundary off the coast of the southeast starts to diminish, and the chances for any cumulus clouds in the flight path over the water just off the coast reduce from the day before. And if we look at our 48-hour backup window for Saturday morning, the weather still looks favorable with offshore winds from the southwest or south from the west, really. They pick up a little bit, 12 knots with sustained gusts to 16 knots at 230 feet. However, the upper level wind flow does change and become more from the east and stronger. So if we do see any showers or thunderstorms over the Gulf Stream, which is pretty typical for this time of year in the morning, and if they do produce any anvil clouds, there's just a very slight possibility of those anvils reaching close to the coast. So that is why we have that 20% probability of violation for the attached and detached anvil cloud rules for the 48-hour backup day on Saturday morning. So again, overall, we're in a very favorable weather pattern for a morning launch time frame for Thursday through Saturday.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Now we're going to start taking questions from reporters and social media. For reporters, please remember to press *1 to ask your questions. And those online, you can use the hashtag Countdown to Mars. Our first question comes from Marcia Dunn of AP. Marcia?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Marcia.
Yes, great. I cannot remember so much company on the way to Mars as there is happening this year. And I was wondering if either Mr. Breidenstein or Dr. Zurbuchen could comment on China and the UAE on their way to Mars and whether there's any sense of competition and is the pressure on now that the world has 2 good launches off and NASA's coming up third. Thanks.
Sure, I'll start. A couple of things. Number one, we welcome more nations taking trips to Mars and studying it and delivering the science and sharing the science with the world. That's what science is all about. And of course, it's a very uniting kind of thing. I honestly don't see this as a competition at all. This is our 9th time to go to Mars and land softly and do robotic experiments and discovery. And so we've been doing this now for decades successfully. And of course, this mission is by far the most sophisticated mission ever. So I don't see it as a competition, but certainly we welcome more explorers to deliver more science than ever before, and we look forward to seeing what it is that they're able to discover.
Thanks.
Spaceflight Now. Stephen?
And I think my question is from Matt Wallace. You mentioned you worked on numerous rovers before, and you listed all the firsts on this mission. I'm curious if you could compare the complexity and risks associated with this mission with Curiosity and previous missions. You know, everyone was kind of keyed up for Curiosity's landing back in 2012 with the 7 minutes of terror. The Sky Crane was brand new. Just interested, given your experience base and your assessment of the risks and complexity of this mission overall compared to prior NASA rovers. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. From a complexity perspective, it's clearly a more sophisticated vehicle. As I said, we're carrying about 50% more surface payload than Curiosity did, and that was by far the most complex thing we had ever done up until that time. So we're taking this a step further, and really the sampling system that we have on this vehicle, because we are collecting rocks and soil samples that we ultimately want to bring back to the Earth and look for really trace chemical signatures from billions of years ago, very faint signatures. The system that we use to collect those samples has to be immensely clean, and so we had to sterilize it and we had to clean it from an organics and chemical perspective, and we had to keep it that way from all the rest of the systems that we had to use to get the system to Mars. And so that was, from a complexity perspective, it was really another step beyond what we did on Curiosity. From a risk perspective, I think one of still the highest risk portion of all of these missions is the landing process. You mentioned it, the 7 minutes of terror. There's really nothing we can do. We call it do EDL, do entry, descent, and landing. We literally send a command to the spacecraft that says that, and then for the spacecraft on its own has to get from outside the planet, moving at 12,000 miles an hour, all the way down safely to the surface, without any human interaction, and it's basically a controlled disassembly the whole way. It's by far the most complex, or the most the highest risk phase of the mission still, and we have the good fortune on 2020 to have leveraged the system that we designed on Curiosity. And so not only do we have all the testing behind us on this system that we did before we launched and landed Curiosity, we have the Curiosity flight itself and all the telemetry that came back, and it performed extremely well during that mission. And then we did a whole lot additional testing, to launch the spacecraft. Still no guarantees. Our hearts will still be beating hard when we get to that point of the mission. But I do think it's an advantage that we have. This is not a first-time landing system as we had on Curiosity.
Do you mind adding a word or two about the terrain relative navigation? Of course, if we landed with the Curiosity system as it is, we couldn't go to where we're going, right?
That's right. Yeah, I mentioned briefly before that for the first time we're going to use a hazard avoidance system, autonomous hazard avoidance system. We call it terrain relative navigation. And it allows us to go to Jezero Crater, which is a very interesting scientific site because it's got a lot of rocks and escarpments and sand dunes and a lot of variation in the terrain. And all those things are wonderful for scientists who are looking for stratigraphy and other things. But they all represent landing hazards for us. And so to get to a scientifically valuable site like Jezero, we had to develop a new hazard avoidance system, and we are flying that. It's a system that essentially uses orbital imagery that we have from our other spacecraft. We identify hazards on the surface. We mark those hazards on a map. We load that map onto the spacecraft, and as we're coming down, getting close to the planet, we take a picture. We find ourselves in the hazard map that we've got on board, and then we divert away from the most significant hazards to the spacecraft. And so it does significantly improve our probability of landing in a safe way, particularly in rough terrain at Jezero. This is a system that we've tested extensively. Thomas, in particular, wanted to make sure that that we had all of the necessary checks and balances and rigorous reviews in place for this system before we selected Jezero as a final destination. But we have exercised the system out in the desert with simulated landings. We have simulation. We have computer simulations. And it just works extremely well. It's a very powerful and robust system, and we have a lot of confidence in it.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Jackie Goddard of the Times of London.
Yes, hello. And maybe this question, I think, is for Matt. Adding the audio is an interesting extra on this mission. And I wondered, what is the scientific significance of adding this extra sensory dimension to the mission, and at what point in the entry, descent, landing sequence does it kick in? Thank you.
So we'll turn on the microphone pretty early in the process before we deploy the parachute, and we should be able to hear some of the spacecraft pyrotechnic events and separation events, perhaps the atmosphere at some level. Interacting with the spacecraft itself. So we turn it on pretty early in the entry, descent, and landing system. The microphone we expect to survive landing and to also be usable on the surface. We have two microphones actually. I'm talking about a general engineering microphone now, and we do think that microphone will be able to hear our big rotary percussive drill out on the end of the robot arm as it jackhammers its way into rocks, as well as the wheels crunching over the surface of Mars. We think we'll be able to hear those things. From an engineering diagnostic perspective, we're not quite sure, how it will help us. That's something we're going to have to understand, I think, as we get some experience with it. There is a second microphone. It's mounted on the top of the mast, and it's associated with one of our instruments. The instrument is called SuperCam, and it's a laser breakdown spectrometer. Essentially, it fires a laser, and as the laser goes out, it creates a little plasma cloud with the rocks and the dust that it interacts with. And when we fire this in our test beds or in ATLO, you can hear it pop. You can hear the zap almost, and the science community is hoping, with that targeted microphone up on the top of the mast, that they will learn something about the composition of the things that the laser is interacting with. In particular, but it's a little bit of an experiment. You know, we haven't done this before. It's the first time we've taken this this human sense to Mars and exercised it. So we're going to find out. I think we're going to learn as we go.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Jackie. Our next question comes from Irene Klotz of Aviation Week.
Thanks very much. I think this is also for Matt. Have the repositioning of the NASA 3 Mars orbiters already begun to be able to provide, I guess, as real-time comms as possible for the entry, descent, and landing?
I'm not quite sure I heard the entire question, but I think it's related to the NASA orbiters and their support role for entry, descent, and landing communications.
Yeah, if that repositioning, if any, has already started, or when you expect to do that, and which orbiters will be used?
So we're primarily going to use the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MRO, for entry, descent, and landing communications. And it has a minor amount of repositioning, as you mentioned, that'll be required so that it's exactly overhead when we land at Jezero Crater. And I do not believe that repositioning has quite started yet, but we got plenty of time to get that done before we land.
Thank you. We're going to take some questions from social media. Our first one comes from J.K. Trzynski. What sort of data would Perseverance gather on the Martian surface? Who wants to take that?
Perseverance gather on the Mars surface. Well, we've talked a lot, I think, about the science mission of the project, and you know, Thomas, did you want to go ahead and say a few words?
First of all, amazing question. That's why we're going there. I think the other thing I want to say, there's a show right after this, really focused on science with all details. But you know, if you look back from, you know, look at the data that we're going to gather. You talked about the weather instrument, kind of the META that is standing there, and it's really a weather station right there in Jezero Crater. You go look at the cameras. There's numerous cameras that are there. You talked about SuperCam. There's another camera that is, you know, from a point of view of field of view and resolution, really quite unprecedented. Then you have the instruments that are looking at composition, you know, some of them remotely, some of them by looking at samples, and really actually equipping us to gather the right samples, to actually gather them and put them into these very clean sample tubes to bring back. You know, everything, I would argue, is set up for that, to really get us that the ultimate data that we want to gather are these samples. I mean, for us, those are the most precious samples that we believe we've had as humans, in terms of samples of nature, of really answering this important question of astrobiology the administrator talked about. That is the ultimate, you know, data, not only the sample itself, but the context in which this sample is collected. We learn from geology here, we learn from the important analysis in every environment that in fact that context is very important for the interpretation thereof. But I just want to block the session later. What did I miss, Matt?
No, I think you hit most of it. As Thomas said, we have very powerful spectrometers out on the end of the robot arm. We'll be able to look at the rock at a spatial resolution of 100 microns, which is tiny, and really understand from spot to spot, you know, how the chemical composition of the rock changes. We've got spectrometers up on the top of the mast, which I mentioned, the SuperCam. We've got zoom cameras up there as well. We've got the weather station. We also have a subsurface radar sounder for the first time on the surface of Mars, which will help us understand contextually the geography of the landing site. That's the Norwegian-provided radar, which I mentioned before. So we have a very, very powerful suite of instruments that will help us do exactly what Thomas said, which is find the right samples to collect. You know, we can't bring back a lot, you know, a lot of material when we bring these samples back, and so we want to make sure we've gone to the right site. We want to make sure we've picked the right targets, and we want to make sure we understand the context and the chemistry of those targets when we bring them back.
So when you talk about what is the data that's coming back, you mentioned spectroscopy, the idea that you can shoot energy into a material. Think of radio waves, or in this case, it could be light waves or infrared waves, and then certain wavelengths bounce back and other wavelengths are absorbed. And based on that, we can make determinations as to the chemical composition of the materials. And here on Earth, what we have been studying is the chemical composition of materials where we know that chemical composition was a result of ancient life here on Earth. So we're taking what we've learned from our own planet and we're applying it to another planet to make determinations as to whether or not there was maybe at one time biology. We're talking about microbial kind of organisms on Mars. And then once we make that determination, we, no kidding, cache a sample. If we think it's a high probability that there could have been life in that place, we cache a sample so that one day, 4 years from now, or I should say 2026, 6 years from now, we can bring it back to Earth and study it and actually make a no kidding determination whether or not humans, or I should say Earth, is the only place in our own solar system that has the capability of hosting life. And that's, I think, one of the most exciting things about this mission. So thank you, Bettina.
And thank you all. In many ways, you've answered our next question from social media. Ralph Bennett asks, why do we need another rover there? What more can we learn from Mars?
Well, there's a lot. I'll let you guys.
I think it's precisely that. What's really interesting is, like, every time we build a rover and we send it there, with it go a number of questions that we have. For example, spirit and opportunity. You talked about it, Matt, earlier. Or questions about water, the history of water at the surface of Mars. So the entire instrument complement was laid out for that. Curiosity was about really trying to understand the composition and are there any organics, right? Many questions that were open, and and really what we're learning from curiosity, and there's surprises even today that the level of complexity in some of these organics is much higher. Now it turns out the word complex means the more complex, the more life, kind of the more the likelihood to life. So that's why that's such an important characteristics. And so now what Perseverance is really, I would argue, the first, and we've said it, the administrator said it earlier, the first mission that really had at its core the question about life, astrobiology, and therefore the instruments are very different for that. And it's I would argue, very hard to imagine coming up with that instrument complement and that location without the other insights that we got from these other missions before, the ones I mentioned as well as others. And so for us, it's a very different, I mean, it's, in science, when you peel back a layer, it's not like an onion where the layer that comes from below, it looks like the layer above. It's a very different set of questions that are there, and we're peeling back that onion and frankly going after a question that humans over millennia have asked, and we're answering it for the first time with the tools of science, potentially the best way we can. I mean, for me, that's what it's about. I mean, that question, it's an old question. Like, you go read old philosophers of the past, the Greeks, wherever the culture is, the people have asked those questions. We're starting to address it with the instruments that are there. That's the amazing part of it.
Exciting. We're going to go to another question from our reporters on the line. Mike Wall of Space.com. Mike?
Thank you all. This one's probably, again, for Matt. Like you mentioned, you had to pull off sort of like a magic trick with Ingenuity to sort of make it fit. Could you go into a little more detail about what you needed to do and what the exact challenges were sort of posed by that additional payload? Thanks.
Can I start this one, if it's all right, Bettina? So this is probably my fault, Matt, and I apologize. Thomas Zurbuchen brought this into the administrator's suite in my early days as being the NASA administrator, and he had this, hey, what if we were to do this? And I loved it, and I told Thomas, whatever you can do to make that happen, I'm all for it. And of course, Thomas brought that to you, and so I know it was not easy to get done, but I will tell you, I sent a tweet about, it wasn't called Ingenuity at the time, it was just called the Mars helicopter, but I sent a tweet about it on like a Friday afternoon at 5 p.m., and I didn't have a lot of Twitter followers at the time, and I sent a tweet, and it was like, within an hour or two, there's 5,000 retweets. I mean, it just kind of caught fire, and everybody, and then all the media started covering. It was a very exciting moment. So anyway, I know it was difficult. Want you to know how much I appreciate all the work that you've done. So go ahead.
I'll say I remember an all-hands meeting where we were right after we were asked to try to accommodate the helicopter, and some of the managers were kind of scratching their heads and wondering how we were going to do this. And I asked for a show of hands from our own team who would like to see the helicopter on this mission, and pretty much every hand went up. So, even the people that had to figure it out were excited by the project, and it was difficult. It's a very, very unusual payload. It's very lightweight. Because it has to fly in this very low density air. It's got these big, stiff carbon fiber blades that sit out that have to be protected from the debris that we kick up, for instance, during entry, descent, and landing. It's got legs that have to fold up and then have to be deployed out. And we had to, essentially the rover was full. The inside of the vehicle, which is where we have most of our electronic systems so that we can keep them warm, that was full. The top of the vehicle was pretty much overpopulated already, and so and we had to come up with a way of accommodating it. And ultimately, we decided to put it up under the belly of the vehicle. It turns out that the belly pan is a pretty separable thing. We kind of take that belly pan off, and we can give it to the team that was developing the accommodation engineering systems for the helicopter, and they used some of our existing actuators and motors and things like that. We sort of hunted around for available spare flight hardware to figure out how we could do it and get it on the vehicle in a way that, one, kept the helicopter safe, and two, allowed us to deploy it off of the vehicle in a way that it wouldn't represent a risk or a threat to the rest of the mission. We called it the objective essentially was do no harm to the primary mission, because this was an extra technology experiment. And beyond that, our team was oversubscribed, just with engineering challenges ourselves with the sampling system and the instruments. And so we made a phone call, and one of our system contractors, Lockheed Martin in Denver, stepped up to the plate. We provided them a basic design and some hardware and some engineering support, and we were able to figure out how to accommodate it underneath the vehicle. And we went through a lot of testing to make sure, in fact, that that it would deploy, that it would stow appropriately, and that it would deploy safely on the surface of Mars. And then, of course, we still had to figure out how to operate it once we got it there. And I think we were working through those opportunities and those issues. So we'll be ready to go when it's time to fly the helicopter on Mars, but it wasn't easy.
Fantastic. We're going to take our last question from Leo Enright of Irish Television. Leo?
Thanks, Bettina, and indeed thanks to Matt Wallace and to Dr. Zabrukin for their wonderful contributions. But my question is for the administrator. Mars 2020 is basically Mars 2026. And I'm going to ask a political question, which I think I can ask because I'm an ocean away, so nobody is going to think I've got an agenda. A lot of your international partners will be wondering, will you be willing to continue to serve as NASA administrator no matter who gets elected in November? Now, assuming, of course, that you're asked.
Look, my job right now is to do these stunning achievements on behalf of the United States of America. And look, I appreciate the question, but look, I serve at the pleasure of the president. I serve at the pleasure of the current president, and I think it's important that the next president has the NASA administrator that that he wants. The way the political system in the United States works, the NASA administrator is selected by the president. I think it's important. You have to have that relationship. Look at what we're doing right now. We've got the Artemis program, which we have reestablished that we're going to the moon sustainably, that we're going with a purpose to get to Mars. And because of that, we've had really big budget requests. The President of the United States has put on the table the biggest budget that NASA has ever had in nominal dollars ever. Now, of course, in real dollars, Apollo was bigger. But we're heading the right direction. And that's because the President of the United States trusts the NASA administrator. And I would recommend to whoever the President is at any point in time, pick a NASA administrator that you trust to get the job done. Period. End of story. And look, I've had the time of my life in this job. I'm not going to lie. It's the greatest job I've ever had. But I think there's a time when it's somebody else's turn, and I am under no illusions that I'm the only one capable of doing this job. So there's a lot of people that would be even better than me, and we'll leave it at that. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Leo. With that, we're going to end our questions, but we're going to turn it over to final remarks from NASA Administrator.
Well, thank you, Bettina, and thank you for the panel participating in this today. What an exciting time. And I know we just had this conversation about Ingenuity and the helicopter that's going to fly on Mars. I want to kind of put it in perspective for a moment. Imagine looking from Perseverance out at a helicopter that is flying around Perseverance, and the helicopter is looking back at Perseverance, getting us images of Perseverance, what Perseverance is doing. We're going to be able to see with our own eyes, with motion pictures, these kind of activities happening on another world. And I just can't tell you how excited I am about Ingenuity and, of course, Perseverance, the first astrobiology mission. We shouldn't forget, we're proving out that we can turn the carbon dioxide atmosphere of Mars into pure oxygen for life support, because the President has given us an agenda to plant an American flag on Mars, and, of course, to go with our international partners and our commercial partners, all of which is in President Trump's Space Policy Directive 1. So we have this big agenda. This is a precursor mission, but it's also a scientific mission in its own right. And there's so much more to discover, and we're so looking forward to it. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for paying attention. If you want to follow us, if you want to participate with us virtually, from Thursday forward, nasa.gov. I would encourage everybody to go to nasa.gov, and this is all about the next generation. We want to inspire people. So have your kids or your grandkids tune in. This is a great moment for not just the United States of America, but also for the world.
Thank you so much, Jim. And thank you so much for joining our conversation. The next briefing will be the Mars 2020 Science Briefing today at 3 p.m. And then we mentioned launch coverage begins on Thursday at 7 a.m. and the launch is at 7:50. You can continue to talk about the greatness of this Mars Perseverance rover and Mars 2020 and Mars Ingenuity by joining us at Twitter and Facebook at Mars Perseverance. And hashtag Countdown to Mars. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.